To get started with the maze timing exercise, let's launch Adobe Animate and create a new document. The size of our document needs to be 1000 pixels wide by 1000 pixels tall. We're going to set the frame rate to be 24 frames per second, and we're going to keep the platform type at ActionScript version 3. We can say Create, and this will give us our new document. Now before I get started, make sure you're working in the classic mode setup. We want to be able to see our timeline and our tools, our stage, and also our properties and libraries and other panels off to the right-hand side. If you don't see this, you can go up to Window, down to Workspaces, and select Classic, or you can reset the classic mode if things are moved around. The other thing I like to do is to scale my stage down. At the top right-hand corner, we're going to go from 100% to Fit in Window. This will automatically scale it to fit the size of my window regardless the size of my stage frame. The next thing we need to do is to import our maze PNG into our library. Let's go up to File, down to Import, and choose Import to Library. Locate the maze timing folder that you should have downloaded from the class page and select the maze PNG. If you're unable to select this PNG file, make sure you enable all of the file types. Sometimes by default other file types are selected, and that keeps you from selecting this. With all files, this will give you everything. You can say Open, and this has placed that image into your library. Let's go to our Libraries panel. Notice here's our maze PNG added to our library folder. Click on this image and drag it into the work area, and you can see it's added now to our stage. We can use our black arrow selection tool to click on it and drag it till it's nice and centered into the work area. The next thing we need to do is to rename and create some more layers. Since this is going to be our maze layer, let's go to our timeline and double-click Layer 1 to rename it Maze. We can hit Return to lock that in. We also want to lock down this layer so that we don't accidentally move it or move or delete anything away. So I'm going to click on the little lock icon on this area. The next thing we need to do is create a new layer for our ball. At the top of the timeline, choose New Layer. This will give us Layer 2. We can double click on it and call this the ball layer. Again, hit Return to lock in that name. We're going to keep this layer unlocked because we're going to be moving the ball around and adding on more frames to it. Now let's create a ball. Going over to your Tools panel, locate the Oval tool. With the Oval tool selected, let's open up our Properties panel. Make sure in your properties that you have Object Drawing Mode turned on. With it turned on, this will create a solid object. We want to set our stroke color to be a dark red and our fill color to be an orange. Also, you can set your stroke width to be 4 points. From here, we can go to our stage, holding down the Shift key, click and drag to create a perfect circle that fits nicely inside of one of the square areas. It's okay if it's a little bit smaller, it doesn't have to fill up the entire area. If you do need to resize it, you can use the Free Transform tool to click on your object and then click and drag on each of the parts to resize it as needed. Do remember to hold down the Shift key once you're finished. Let's make this ball into a symbol. Again, I'm going to choose my black arrow selection tool and make sure my ball is selected. Then we'll go up to Modify and choose Convert to Symbol. Notice that the keyboard shortcut is F8. With that selected, we can give it the name of ball. Make sure the type is going to be a graphic, and we'll say OK. This will add the ball graphic to our library. Now let's animate the ball. Returning to my timeline, I'm going to move the ball till it's just outside of the start of my maze. This will be the starting point for my animation. Next, I'm going to go to my timeline and I'm going to select the 5th frame on my ball layer. From here, we're going to insert a keyframe on this ball layer. So go into Insert, Timeline, choose Keyframe. The keyboard shortcut by default is also F6. This will add a little dot keyframe to here. Notice that when we do this, you'll also lose the maze. This is simply because we don't have a frame for the maze. So let's choose the maze layer, and then we'll go to Insert, Timeline, and choose a regular frame. The keyboard shortcut for that is F5. And this will add some time for the maze layer as well. Returning back to the ball layer, we can now click on the ball and let's move it into that first square frame. Now we're going to repeat this process for each of the different movements of the ball throughout this entire animation. Here's how the process is going to work. Every time we move the ball in one direction, I want you to count the number of squares that it moves over. Every square is going to represent 5 more frames. So for instance, I'm going to move the ball to the right, so I need to add 5 frames to here. Here's the process that you need to follow. Make sure it's in this order. So I know I need to move over 5 frames, so I can go up to my timeline. Let's move the timeline over another 5 frames. In this case, this will put me at 10. We can now add on a keyframe in the ball layer. Again, that's the F6 key. And we can add a regular frame in the maze layer. Again, that's F5 to do that. Once I've added the frames first, then I can return to my stage, and let's move the ball into the next position. Now I can repeat the process again, moving downward. In this case, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. So that's 5, 10, 15, 20 frames to be down here. Going back up to my timeline, adding 20 frames to this will put me at frame number 30. So with frame 30 selected, let's add a keyframe to the ball layer. And let's add a regular frame, F5, to the maze layer. Now that I've added those frames, I can then move my ball down to the bottom position. You must add the frames and keyframes first before moving the ball. Repeat this process for each of the different movements until it moves all the way around to the end of your maze. Now, if you make a mistake, it's easy enough to remove the frames. All you have to do is select the frame or keyframe you want to remove. Then you can hold down Shift and F5 to remove the frame. Or you can go to Edit, Timeline, and choose Remove Frames. I'm going to go ahead and finish out the rest of my animation. Keep in mind your maze may look different from what I have on the screen, but once you're finished, it should have the same setup. Alright, now that I've added all of my keyframes for the entire animation, let's go back and add some tweening to add the full animated movement of the ball. Going to my timeline, scroll all the way back to the beginning and select the first keyframe. We're still working in the ball layer. To add tweening to this keyframe, go up to Insert and create a classic tween. The classic tween will add a purple arrow from this first keyframe to the second. And when you scrub over, you can see how that will add and move the ball for you. Also with that one selected, let's add some easing to it. In your Properties panel, locate the Tweening sub-panel, click on Classic Ease, and let's do an ease in and ease out. Select ease in and out, and then double-click on Quad to apply that. You should see Quad Ease In and Ease Out as your name. If you don't, go back and reselect it till you do. Repeat this process for each of the keyframes on the ball layer. So select the next keyframe, go up to Insert, a classic tween, then go over to your tweening in your Properties panel and select Ease In and Out, Quad. To help you go a little bit faster, especially if you're working with a mouse that has a right click or on your laptop, you can right click on any keyframe and choose Create a Classic Tween. And this will add the tween for you. And then you can go back to your tweening and then choose Ease In, Quad, Ease Out for that one as well. Just repeat this process for each one. Make sure it's a classic tween and make sure you're using the quad, ease in, and ease out each time. I'm going to go through now and do this for each of my different keyframes for the ball that we've selected. The final thing that we want to do is adjust the timing of this animation so that it lasts exactly 7 seconds. If I look on my timeline, I can see that my animation stops just short of the 7-second mark. So we need to be able to stretch this out so that it lasts just slightly longer. Here's how we're going to do that. On your timeline, click once on the ball layer and you'll notice all of the frames on this layer are now selected. If you go to the very last frame and hover over this last yellow line, you can see it turns into a double arrow. Once it's a double arrow, carefully click and drag until your arrow reaches that 7-second mark. Notice that this will appropriately stretch out everything to that 7 seconds. Finally, select the maze layer and let's add one more blank frame to there. With this done, we can now test our movie. Let's go up to Control and down to Test, and this will open our SWF preview. You can see as the ball moves around, it should be easing out all the way to the end, and then it will loop back over to the beginning. Again, if you find any problems with this, you should go back, remove the frame, and adjust the frame and placement accordingly. Once you're finished, you can close this out. Let's save our animation, so I'll go to File and Save. Make sure you're saving in the appropriate folder with your name on it, and I'm going to call this Maze Timing. As far as the file format, make sure you're in Animate document, so it should be a .fla. You can hit Save. This flash file is what you'll upload to the class Moodle page once you're finished.